Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. You're Event Leaders 2020, and this is a major experiment in doing live events in a digital form. Next presenter, we have a guy called Terry Bird. Terry's an awesome guy. He's a director of sales enablement at IBM. So Terry is as corporate as he can get in terms of his job role, but he's also a super creative musical guy that loves his DJing, loves parties, and is also very technical as well. So his perspective is unbelievably unique. Nightclub background, loves a party, very professional, and has also produced a lot of very high-level, high-budget corporate events in the past. So let's hear what Terry's got to say, and then we're going to do a Q&A with him afterwards. Let's listen to Terry.
Hi, my name's Terry Bird, and I'm delighted to be here with you today and Johnny and the SXS team virtually, remotely for this special kind of conference, Event Leaders remote conference. I am the Director of Sales Enablement for IBM Systems, responsible for all skills development and sales enablement for around 4,000 sellers, 5,000 business partners in the business. I have been in and around events for many years through my career, both attending, presenting at them, planning and running them, hosting them, both internal and external type audiences. But we're here today to focus on a specific type of event, and that's the internal event, the type of event where people haven't paid an entry or booking fee to come. They're being told to go there because it's part of their job. Sales kickoff type events, product launches, product training, etc. And we're here really to focus on a specific aspect of those type of events, and that's, attention deficit. How do we keep those sellers engaged and feeling like they're not prisoners and actually wanting to engage in that content? And we're going to talk about that, so let's get into it.
Attention deficit. I'm sure it's something we're all familiar with right now, working from home, with our new home co-workers that we were never used to working with our family around us, homeschooling. It's tough. So I'm sure it's something we all recognize and appreciate right now. But getting on to the topic about internal sales events and that big challenge we're talking about here, attention deficit. As I said, when we bring these folks together, they haven't paid to be there. They haven't paid an entry fee. They're not volunteering. They're being asked to come as part of their jobs. And we're going to talk about some of the spectrum of challenges with the traditional approach to these types of events and whether they really deliver the return on investment in terms of the outcomes for those attendees. Are they really becoming better at their jobs because of it, or are they just going through the motions? So let's break down your typical traditional internal sales event. 2.5 to 3.5 days long, though they can be shorter or longer, but this is kind of what you'll typically find. Certainly long days. I've seen many events that start 8 in the morning and run till 6 or 7 in the evening. Normally, some element of main tent content, either the first half a day opening of the entire event, quite often you'll find main tent content at the beginning of each day before they go into various breakouts. And then breakouts can be by role, by content type, by product, depending on the nature of the organization. Running up to these types of events, it quite typically is anarchy when it's putting the agenda together. Things move around a lot. Topics change, speakers change. Speakers are demanding longer time than you can really allocate to them. Executives come in and want to get onto the agenda. Things move around a lot right up until the last minute. In terms of how we break up the content, you then typically got coffee breaks, buffet meals. Depending on the size of the event, if it can be a large event, those buffet meals, you have to go off to some other dining hall. Wi-Fi is a whole topic all by itself, depending on the nature of the venue. Either the Wi-Fi isn't powerful enough, the event organizers haven't put in enough concurrent bandwidth, or that Wi-Fi gets abused. People are downloading Netflix movies on their devices using the event Wi-Fi. long walks around venues. If I've been in some of the larger events that I've experienced in places like Vegas, Mandalay Bay, for example, great convention center. But when it comes to filling that with 8 to 10,000 people, you're really looking at using hotels that are spread around a few hotel blocks. And a hotel block in Vegas can mean a half an hour walk. Venues like the Gaylord Opry in Nashville, great venue laid out over a wonderful set of zones. But depending on where you are in the hotel, staying in the hotel, it can be, again, a 20 to 25-minute walk to the conference space. And you get a whole spectrum of engagement, which we'll talk about as we get into this a bit deeper. But those that really want to be there, those who are willing to learn, those who want to be involved in every session, through to those who think it's just a bit of a jolly. They're there for networking, catching up with old friends, having a few drinks, getting in a bit of chill time, having some fun. Those who are there to meet with their peers and see it as an opportunity to have face-to-face meetings rather than actually be there for the event itself. And then quite often what you get is, in terms of the events, is they often finish at lunchtime or early afternoon on the final day. But by the time you actually get to that closing session or that lunch on the final day, half the people have gone home. I saw an event just very recently where the level of attrition was pretty much 50% by the closing session, approaching lunch on the last day. And that's something, if you've been involved in internal sales enablement events, you will have definitely seen. Let's talk a bit more about some of the aspects of these types of events. People have been in sessions. They're getting a bit thirsty, a bit tired, they need a coffee, maybe the air conditioning's too cold, and they're a bit restless. And off they go to the break. And the first thing the MC or the previous presenter before sending them to break says is, make sure you're back here for 10:15. And then, of course, 10:15 comes, goes, everybody's still in the corridors, nobody's actually looking at their watch. Typically, someone from the venue will be walking around with the 3-note microphone like a sound from Heidi High. Ding, 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 trying to get everybody back in. That doesn't work. You get event organizers walking around, shuffling small groups of people back towards the doors, asking them to come back inside. It never runs on time. And I liken this to herding cats. I've done it. I've been up and down corridors myself, shouting at folks, trying to get them back into the rooms. It's very difficult to keep on track with an agenda when you've got large groups of people moving around who may have not seen each other face to face for a while, so they are very much looking forward to catching up on a chat. Of course, you get your normal presentation content, but typically these types of events are littered with panels as well. Panels are great for more dynamic ad hoc interaction between the presenters and Q&A type settings. But we've all seen panels before. There's nothing new about a panel and watching what can be quite often a group of less than dynamic speakers talking to each other and focusing on each other rather than on the audience. Just recently, I saw a panel that was fairly horrific where one of the panel members clearly hadn't been vetted too well by the event organizers and was being a bit disparaging about the company that he was actually speaking, had been invited to speak about. Plenty of sessions, presentations, different speakers, moving from room to room, coffee breaks, lunches, panels, and quite often finishing the day with a drinks reception where you get to have a few drinks. It's been a long day, you're tired, but you're catching up with peers, networking, and it all adds up to a pretty intense experience, which means that quite often it's exhausting. You don't get to switch off for 9-10 hours of the day. You may not be on your own time zone, so you're not getting great sleep. You've got jet lag. It's hard work. No wonder people switch off. No wonder their attention drifts. And they might be tempted to leave early, get home, get back to work, get back to their families. And it leaves us thinking, surely there has to be a better way. How can we improve this experience so that it's much more enjoyable, engaging, folks feel more compelled to be in these sessions and stay for the whole thing? It really means there has to be something in it for them. Now, here's one example. It's an extreme example, but I was involved in an event with 6,000 attendees going back about 6 years ago, held in Orlando. And the closing main tent session was given by an absolutely fantastic speaker. He's world renowned for his keynote presentations, Magic Johnson, basketball legend. And I can tell you there was pretty much zero attrition. Every seat was taken for that final closing presentation. But that's an extreme solution. He's a world-leading renowned speaker and costs a lot of money, right? It doesn't come cheap. And is way beyond the budget for, your average size event. So how do we think about serious, genuine, reasonable solutions to how we can fix some of these problems and increase that engagement? Driving engagement comes in a number of shapes and forms. I myself am still always learning every day about how to do this better. Nobody professes to have all the answers, but I'm going to share some of my experience and my observations about things that worked and things that haven't. Engaging an audience is not easy. You have to have a number of things that come together in terms of compelling content, a reason for them to listen to that content, how it's meaningful to them, how it's very engaging and interesting and captures their imagination, and then how you generate interaction with the audience through that content. And it's actually not just about a single flow of information from a stage to an audience, but actually it's dynamic flow of information between the two that makes it a more engaging experience. First of all, PowerPoint. This is a whole topic all by itself. I have a whole other set of observations and a presentation I could give on this specific area and death by PowerPoint, but we've all been there. We've all seen it. Those speakers who turn up with 90 charts, they haven't really practiced it to be delivered in the time that they've been allocated. They have a bunch of charts that have a whole list of bullets on them, and they're really using the chart as a script. Monotone, flat speakers, no rise and fall in their voice, no compelling interaction with the audience, not engaging at all. People switch off very quickly. And if you do a string of those types of presentations, then it soon mounts up to become death by 1,000 cuts in terms of PowerPoint. How do you stop and avoid death by PowerPoint? PowerPoint is a wonderful visual storytelling tool. It shouldn't be used as the script. So the focus on great content is of primary importance. Make sure that the content goes through rigorous review cycles, that you actually have subject matter experts helping your speakers as they shape and create the content to make it visually compelling. Focus on great content is very important. But equally, focusing on moments. It's not just about the content itself. Creating moments in your event will capture the imagination and tap into emotions that people will remember. And when you do that, people really start to engage and become part of the energy of the event. And a couple of examples. A sales leadership academy that was run just a few months ago within IBM Systems. And we sat and thought about the ways that we could engage the audience. Traditionally, these types of events, very stiff, very formal, bringing together managers from all over the world, very predictable in terms of the content. And we set out to surprise them. And from the opening main tent, when everybody was given thundersticks, and we came out to the tunes of We Will Rock You, and everybody on their feet clapping, it generated energy in the room like I've rarely seen. And it set the tone for the entire event. It captured the imagination of the attendees, completely caught them off guard, and our general manager of sales came out playing a vuvuzela. Next day at that very same event, instead of a drinks reception, we actually had all 600 attendees. We were in Nashville, after all, engaging in an Old Town Road dancing competition. We actually had our general manager of sales went on stage himself and led from the front, something nobody was expecting, with a group of professional dancers. And then everybody split into teams of 8 to 10 people and were provided with fancy dress, cowboy hats, scarves, props, and had to put together their own interpretation of the Old Town Road dance. Everybody got recorded. Whole thing went on for 2 or 3 hours. Nobody was bored. Drinks were laid on, of course, but one of the most engaging evening activities I've ever seen. And again, completely contributed to a different type of energy around the whole event experience with our executives leading from the front. Now, when it comes to driving audience engagement during sessions and events like this, how do you do that when you have hundreds or thousands of people in an audience and one presenter or a panel on stage? Well, there are technology solutions to help with that. One that we've used quite extensively and with great success is Menti from menti.com. And that allows you to do various things. Actually, you can embed within your presentations live audience interaction. So people go to menti.com on any device and enter a 5 or 6 digit number that gives them access to some questions or interactive widgets that you've prepared, such as a word cloud. So you can actually say, go to this number, and you see on the bottom right, it shows you the number of people who have actually voted, the time until the voting closes, and you can just ask them for a word and generates a word cloud in real time in your presentation on screen there and then. It could also be an interactive audience vote. So if you are choosing winners of a competition, or actually, if you're a more accomplished and confident presenter, you may be asking the audience in what direction they want the presentation to go. And I've seen that done very successfully, where the audience is actually writing the script and choosing the path of the presentation. Real-time feedback on sessions, various interactive portals like that. But the word cloud is a very successful one that we've used. And this was actually an example that was taken from a session that we ran just a few months ago, where we asked the audience for what is your feeling of the event in one word. And we had over 500 people submit words live there and then in the space of 60 seconds and generated this word cloud there on screen in real time. And that's just one example of what you can do with a tool like Menti. There are various other tools out there that perform similar functionality and can really help engage the audience in real time there in the room. In terms of the nature of activities in events like this, something that we've been spending a lot of time on in the last couple of years within IBM Systems is activation of that knowledge, not sitting passively in a chair, being lectured to. We can put all of that great content into self-paced learning online when people can take it themselves. But what we focused on in face-to-face events internally is then taking that knowledge and activating it. And that means workshops, getting hands-on, design thinking sessions, working together to create something tangible. With sales teams, getting them together around live opportunities and talking about account strategies and how they're going to engage as a team with that client or prospect in delivering a compelling value proposition, for example. And that really creates a new level of outcome that comes from these types of events that is much more measurable in terms of ROI too. Activating that knowledge, driving skills, making it practical. And that comes with some caveats because we've faced cultural challenges to that. I won't get into the specifics of different types of demographics and how they typically respond to that type of activity. But you can take some clues from this chart here in terms of teaching old dogs new tricks. You get a complete blend of people who get very hands-on, roll up their sleeves, want to engage in this type of activity, and competitive streaks come out and they want to go and win competitions and things that we put around it. And then you get those that as soon as the lecture part of the content is over and we're moving into a practical applied exercise around a table or in a classroom environment, suddenly find the need to get up and walk out and go find coffee and make some urgent phone calls. So that's a cultural shift that we've been making. We've made long strides on it, but we still have work to do for sure within IBM Systems in terms of our own observations and experience. Now, there's lots more detail we could go into, but in the interests of time and within the limitations of time that we have for this session, I'll move on to a couple of other observations. Of course, it also has to be fun. If it isn't fun, people aren't going to be opening up and engaging in the way that we want them to. So a healthy balance of work and fun is always good. And if you can combine those two in terms of those activities and the way that we get people engaged in competitions, people engaged in different types of things that they're not expecting, like the Old Town Road dancing, for example. That's all going to help elevate the energy and tap into those emotional responses, which will drive that engagement. So something that we have been focused on very much in terms of our events worldwide over the past couple of years is taking a fresh approach, dissecting the age-old challenge of how do we drive better engagement and applying some new lenses to it. And there's a great quote here from Albert Einstein in terms of having to bring a new way of thinking and a new lens and perspective on this. And my advice would be, try new things. So here's some great examples of where we've been working with SXS to look at different approaches within the construct of an event that challenges people, that drives a different type of behavior, and is different to what they're expecting. A couple of examples here. The fishbowl. This is a great suggestion that Johnny and team put together in terms of how you can drive a Q&A session with an audience and have the audience contributing with what could be considered an intense environment where everybody's in the round and facing into the middle. And the folks in the middle who are moderating this type of session are inviting audience members to come forward. And Johnny first presented this to me back last year with his team. And we were putting together an event where we had a senior leader with 30 or 40 of his direct leadership team from around the world. So these are very experienced leaders in their own right, all together in a room for 2 hours with that general manager. And we applied this concept, the Goldfish Bowl. And what we said was, he would sit in the middle and he would open a candid discussion around employee engagement. And we have this annual survey called Pulse, and it really gets into some in-depth observations around how the team, the sales population around the world is feeling, what they're saying, and what they're doing. And to share some of those insights, we want everybody in the room to get involved and share their experiences. And we put up some results on screen that showed some pretty provocative outcomes from that Pulse survey. We invited leaders, senior leaders, to come into the middle, highlighted some of their data from the Pulse survey, and then asked them to share their observations and experiences about what was good, what was bad, and how they were driving engagement within their team. And in the middle, we had a big egg timer that was a 60-second egg timer, and they'd come forward, you flip the egg timer, you talk, and then you have to go sit back down. Very dynamic, high energy, provocative, but drove an unprecedented level of engagement in the room rather than people sat passively in their chairs. So that's something that works very well for us. Here's another idea that Johnny and team were working with us on is this pitching competition. We recently released a new version of the Z mainframe, strategic offering for the IBM business, very important to us. The Z mainframe actually drives 87% of the world's credit card transactions. Pretty mind-blowing stat, I know. I could tell you much more about that. If you want to hear more about it, please do ask. In terms of sales teams getting together and delivering compelling client-centric value propositions around that platform, we were designing this Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, depending on where you come from, type competition with initial rounds, teams delivering their pitches, and then a board of panel members giving their feedback, asking questions. We took that idea into that Sales Leadership Academy. And what we said was, we want to drive new stories for our systems business. And by stories, we mean value propositions, combinations of our offerings, use cases in industries, in lines of business that we just hadn't thought of before. And by mixing up our teams from different roles and different geographies and putting them together around tables and breaking them out into these rooms, what we did was actually drive a set of heats in each of the 4 rooms. Each room had 10 to 12 teams in it, pitching their ideas in front of the room, and then the room doing a live vote on Menti to choose their winner. What was the best value proposition coming out of that room? And the 4 finalists went forward to the closing presentation on the final day with a panel of a couple of our keynote speakers, a couple of senior leaders, and we facilitated those 4 winners coming onto stage, just like a Dragon's Den type setting, pitching, and then the audience voted in Menti to choose the winner. And we came up with one winner. Incredibly engaging activity, very competitive, And at the end of it, we had what was the one most compelling, strongest value proposition, the new system story that came from the entire event, which is being adopted as a go-to-market sales play across the entire business. So taking that kind of approach of crowdsourcing the solution and having everybody come together to work on their ideas and then present those ideas to the entire audience, both has that micro level of team engagement and the macro level of the entire event coming together around one shared goal. So let's talk about the road ahead. We've talked about some of the ideas that we've been working on and implementing in recent times. But we've been taking a step back and working with the SXS team on how do we really take this entire event experience and elevate it to the next level. And that means taking everything about the event from before folks get there to after they've left and wrapping around it one cohesive experience that touches every element, not just the content, not just the presentations, but everything they do from the moment they enter to the moment they leave. So I'm just going to give you a taste for what we've been looking at and the kinds of ideas that will shape that experience. This is around a Z launch event that we were actually planning to deliver in March in Madrid. Sadly, that wasn't going to happen, of course, because of lockdown and COVID. But these ideas are something that we're going to continue to develop. And when we do have the opportunity to implement these, then we will go ahead and do that. So this is around a Z launch, and the idea was to inject that retro cool feeling around the mainframe and computing. And to do that, we came up with this world, this universe of 80s retro style tech, Stranger Things, Ready Player One, that kind of vibe, Tron, for example. But also to bring into it some of the value propositions of the Z platform. Now, one of the biggest value propositions is around security and resiliency. And therefore, we came up with this idea of creating this game, this universe for the event, which would have hackers, the client, of course, who had their information on their mainframe, these hacktivists, government intelligence agencies, and creating these characters that would form part of a story. That story would really manifest itself starting in the opening main tent when the screens were hacked, and suddenly in the middle of the opening presentation they go down and we have the Dark Phoenix, the hacker, declaring that the data has been taken. And now it's the responsibility of the sellers at the event, the participants, to go find that data and track it down. And then every step through the rest of the event, right to the closing main tent, would be part of that game, from evening receptions to coffee breakouts to networking and being able to interact with these characters as part of that game. Bringing to life that Tron-style arcade as part of the evening reception. Everything down to the sound and the lighting and the drinks and the menu would all be in support of creating this universe and this experience. Much more to come on that, because that's something we'll be developing, so we don't want to give away too many of those secrets. But in closing, my advice, based on my experience and my team's experience and working with great innovators like the team at SXS, is be prepared to try new things. Be prepared to step outside of the ordinary and the traditional. They won't always work, but unless you try them in a setting at scale, you won't truly know. And I'm happy to say that most of the things we've tried have actually worked. And this is about comfort zones, right? People are expecting to come to an event like this, sit in a seat, watch PowerPoint, and leave when they want. We're pushing them outside of the comfort zone by pushing ourselves outside of the normal event experience comfort zone. And one of my last pieces of advice is finding the right production partner. We've been very lucky in working with SXS in that we've had the ability to be able to dream it big, but SXS have actually then taken that dream and imagined it even bigger. And I put bigger here with an asterisk because, of course, you need to be able to dream it bigger within the logistical and budgetary limitations that you have within your organizations. And of course, once you've developed that idea, that big idea, those dreams, you also need a production partner that has the ability to bring it to life and execute in a responsible manner. So that's trust between you and your audience, trust with you and your team, trust with you and your production partner that you work with. All of this development of these great big ideas and creating these experiences will develop trust with your audience. When your audience trust and expect this kind of innovation from you, then they're going to be much more willing to be engaged from the off. So to create those compelling moments, create that experience, build that trust with your audience from the first second that they enter into the event, and you'll be much more likely to hold on to them to the last second. Ultimately, our goal is to develop happy sellers who want to be with us, spend that time indulging in that experience of the event with us and growing their own skills and capabilities and opening their eyes to what is possible. And my closing line is this. Everything I've talked about so far is built around face-to-face events, but of course the landscape has changed, the world has changed around us in real time. All of these concepts and ideas and suggestions and experiences apply to the virtual event world too. In fact, they get amplified there. Poor presentations, poor delivery only gets worse in a virtual setting. Engagement is harder in a virtual setting. But the ideas we've talked about in terms of compelling content, in terms of using technology to create that engagement and that real-time feedback, developing these ideas and these experiences all apply equally in the virtual event world too, because people will be working in different environments, and holding on to their attention and avoiding attention deficit becomes only more increasingly difficult. So what's left for me to say is thank you for spending the time with me. I am going to be opening up for a panel discussion and some Q&A with you, and looking forward to you sharing your own experiences too, so that we can all learn from each other. Thank you very much for this time, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Terry. Great piece, really well rehearsed, a lot of fantastic content there, and thank you for the compliments to our team at SXS. I appreciate that. Can you hear me, Terry? Can you hear me, Terry? I can see your mouth moving, Terry. Terry, I think your microphone is off. You there, Terry?
Yeah, I am. You hear me?
Brilliant. Yes,
yeah,
thank you, Terry. Good. He's here. Fantastic. Thanks so much for the presentation. Is there anything quickly you want to add to what you've already said in your presentation?
No, actually, I wanted to say that how much I've enjoyed all the presentations that have come before today and all the new ideas that's been generating on top of the things that we've been talking about here.
Cool, thanks, Terry. So, got some questions. Here's one from David Gray, who you know. That David's our creative director who presented first thing this morning. He says, amazing implementation of the alternate formats, Terry. When we pitch these, usually people are wary of a cold audience reception. Can you comment on that?
I think when you have someone who kind of sees the possibilities of what can be done with these, and, you know, as you saw in a couple of examples I gave, we've interpreted those ideas and taken them into different kinds of settings. The one with our general manager with the Goldfish Bowl exercise and people coming into the middle with the egg timer, nobody knew how that was going to go down. And actually, you know, we were prepared, and when we briefed him, you may get nobody coming up, and therefore you're going to have to pick people out. In fact, what happened is after the first couple, they were queuing up to come and share their ideas in the middle. So, you know, those kinds of seeing the vision and adapting it to the setting and the content, I found has been the most effective thing.
So in a way, it's a level of courageousness to adopt the approach and then see after the fact that it worked well. You've got to be bold, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so what would you say to someone who's a bit like, oh God, I'm not sure if I want to do that because it's so different from what we normally do? What would your advice be to that kind of person?
It really depends on who it is. I mean, when we're working with some of our stakeholders, and, you know, when I talk about our stakeholders, we're really talking about our senior sales leaders, senior executives in the business. I have to be honest and say I've only really shared half of the information with them and said, look, this is how it's going to work. This is your part to play in that. And then, you know, as we've implemented that, actually worked it around them so that they're starting to see in real time what's actually being rolled out. So I think from my own experience, I've been holding back some of the information around the full experience and what we're expecting just to see if it works or not. Right?
Okay, so that's again courageous and bold to do that, which is not what a lot of people would expect in a company like IBM. So how do you allow yourself that level of creativity and adventurousness in what might sometimes be a slightly conservative corporate environment?
It's a great question, and IBM Systems is probably the most traditional part of IBM as well. When we talk about the mainframe, you're talking about 50-year-old technology. These are the same computers who originally sent man to the moon, and 15 generations of those later, people might think, oh, mainframe, that's old dinosaur technology, and actually it's more critical than ever to the world. But the kinds of people that we have in the IBM Systems division, especially our sellers, without doing them a disservice, much of the demographic is the older, more traditional generation, turning up very suited and booted. And so it's difficult, because I've certainly, since I came into this role in systems in the last couple of years, it's been a huge cultural shift. And in many ways, every time we try and change and take things forward, we're having to work from the top to the bottom. And that means, from our senior execs to all of the attendees, in trying to show them that there can be a better way. And some of that attrition is because, when you start doing hands-on applied activities and workshops, they do go, what the hell is this? This doesn't apply to me because I can't learn anything new. I've done this. I've been doing this for 30 years, so I'm going to get up and leave. And actually, the more that we've rolled into that, and the more we've put high-quality content, self-paced content online, taking the lecture out of the event and making the event much more of an immersive experience and hands-on, we've had more and more success with that over, the last couple of years.
Okay, so your courageousness has resulted in a cultural and perspective change, which has then made your events drive more value for the organization, yeah?
Yeah.
So basically, go for it, have a go, be courageous, make it happen, and then see what happens. But that being the case, how do you deal with it when maybe sometimes you're like, you know what, that just didn't work? How do you deal with that internally and culturally within IBM?
Well, I've still got a job, so it can't be that much. But yeah, every time we do something like this, we learn from it and we take it into the next time that we do it. And that's the key, is having a culture that accepts that you can fail fast, but it's okay to fail fast if you learn from it and take it into the next experiment, right? And not everything's an experiment. You have to have a balance of building on a solid foundation and injecting new ideas as we go and taking it. You can't rip up the entire thing and throw it away and do something completely new, because you're just going to lose people straight away. But taking them on a journey with you, proving things piece by piece, by the time you get a year or two down the line, it can look completely different.
Sure, and I think today the experience we're all having with this live event is experimental, we know that, but what we've done is had foundations of things we know work. I know this camera works, I know this screen looks fantastic on camera, I know the switchgear is really good. We've got our foundations that we know are going to work, and we've added a new layer on top of it. So is that the same kind of process you go through? Just fail small and fast, but on top of things you know are going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we found in reality is that actually each iteration of this, we may start off with a design that's got more new things in it and ends up coming back a bit. And we've learned from that. So we always kind of overstretch the ideas and then come back knowing that there's that middle ground that we were aiming for all along. And that's really in convincing our stakeholders, because when they see it, and I'll protect the innocent and not name names, but there are some senior sales leaders in our business who have really been very traditional, old school, and we've always done it this way, so we want to do it that way. And having shown them how much better it can be has opened their eyes to say, you know what, actually, this is really different and we should be doing this. So, many of the examples and the stories I gave have come from that kind of learning experience with our sales leadership and leading them there. So back to your point, we do have to be brave. We do have to be a bit ballsy in terms of, upsetting the apple cart and taking people there. But, my experience has been there are very few and far between when we come across folks who haven't grasped or embraced the transformation we're trying to drive.
Okay, cool. So be bold, go for it, reach for the sky with your ideas, maybe distill it down back to something a bit closer to the conventional, but still push the boundaries, and have the, again, courage, keep coming back to that, to believe that there are going to be probably a small number of people who don't like it, right?
Yeah, you can't please everybody all the time.
Absolutely. I think
And obviously, in the corporate world, the other thing that comes in is that word we all hate is budget, right? Yeah. We have great big ideas that we would love to do, but there's always that balance in terms of what is feasible, what is practical, and what is affordable.
Sure, that's cool. Okay. Next question. Someone's asking, have you delivered many events online, particularly because of the COVID-19 crisis? And what have you learnt from them?
Yes, just like this, we did that. So actually that Z launch event, I mean, we still launched the Z15 TO2 on March the 8th. So just over a month ago. That entire event in Madrid was going to be a face-to-face event. We had to pivot very quickly to a virtual environment. And that was run over the course of 4 days. Content and delivery very much like we're doing here today. Mm-hmm. Some live content, then going into self-paced content. And actually where we were going to run workshops and hands-on team exercises around tables had to become virtual. And that is the toughest piece. I saw the question in the chat is, how do you turn that group exercise where sellers can be distributed across countries, even continents, and bring them together in a way where they can co-create? And there are technologies that can help with that as well. The one that we've really dived into very recently is Mural. And Mural is a collaborative whiteboarding technology where people can come together and put sticky notes on and scroll all over the whiteboard. It's like a virtual whiteboard where everybody's got a pen at the same time, and it has to be moderated. But we found that to be very effective in facilitating those kind of exercises. And in fact, strangely, we found that the launch around the latest Z platform has actually been largely unaffected because we did that in a virtual setting.
Well, let's pause you there, Terry, on that front. It has been unaffected by not doing an event. That's a real threat to the events industry, right? Is there a threat? And what are us event leaders in this virtual space right now need to do to embrace that when a big corporate like you have just said that not doing a live event didn't really affect it?
Listen, I wouldn't say it didn't affect it, yeah. But in terms of the early indications of numbers and outcomes, it's not had a big detrimental effect on the business. We still ran the event in a very different kind of way, in a very different kind of setting. We actually created training and badges around it. So you had to, as a seller, attend the event, go through the self-paced training, go through these workshops together, create digital proposals. Even the way that we've delivered proposals to clients has changed, right? So that the content the seller is producing, the proposal they're sending to the client is being done digitally now. They're working, they're not going and meeting with the client face to face. They're meeting with them virtually, like we are now in Zoom conferences, right? But the clients are still buying. And that's because a lot of it is critical infrastructure anyway. It doesn't matter if the world is in lockdown or not, the bank still needs to run. But also, I think it's just because we've pivoted to that kind of different mindset, working together. I honestly think, and to your point about the impact on the events industry in the long run, I think it's a pivot towards a different kind of mindset around events. Now, whether they be virtual, face-to-face, a combination of the two, I don't think the events industry will ever be the same. I don't think our internal sales events will ever be the same. But that doesn't mean there's not a huge opportunity for the events industry going forward.
Okay, so maybe let's look at it as an event. The traditional sense might be like some stale croissants, some bad coffee, and we have to sit on a plane for an hour and go to another Marriott or Hilton hotel. Maybe event becomes a different thing. We reflect on what is the event about. It's about sharing knowledge, creating experiences, delivering messages, education. Then we can ask, how else can we do that? And realize, like you've kind of suggested there, we can achieve those objectives with an event that might just not involve as many stale pastries.
Exactly that, exactly that. And the most important thing is outcomes.
Yes.
What do we want our attendees to do differently as a result of attending this event? And if you work backwards from that, the nature of the delivery of the event can be 100 different things, but it's how do you get them to change their behaviors, elevate their skills, do things better and get those outcomes.
Fine, okay. So someone else has asked a great extension question of that. Is once the pandemic is over, do we think people are going to carry on doing these crazy out there virtual events, or are they going to revert back to the hotel function room with a stale croissant model?
A $1 million question right now, right?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know. I think without getting into an existential conversation about the nature of the pandemic and the lockdown, how things unfold as things start to unlock and the world gets back to some sense of normality, and I don't think we will ever get back to full normality. I think we'll then start to think about what do we need to do? How do we need to deliver it? And I think, much like we've seen with the environment, with wildlife coming out now because the world around us has changed, it's changing mindsets. People have actually seen a different way. And it's almost forced us to open our eyes to parallel possibilities, right? And so I know it's difficult to answer that question directly, but we're going to look at a hybrid model. I'm certain that we, IBM, will be looking at a combination of face-to-face and virtual. I don't think, and I'm, projecting into the future here, but I don't think the traditional 3-day sales kickoff event will ever be the same. And I say that with all honesty. I think there will still be face-to-face events where we bring large numbers of people together. But I think even the mindset of the attendee is different. Do people want to get on a plane, travel for 5 or 6 hours to another continent to go and sit in a sales kickoff event for 3 days? People are just going to be wired differently. And so that presents both a challenge and an opportunity for us to engage them in a different way about all the things we talked about, right?
Okay, so let's go off on one a bit existential, as you say. Imagine Terry's got his crystal ball and he can see 2 years in the future, once we're hopefully past this. What do you think a sales enablement event for IBM might look like in terms of the physical meetup aspect of it?
I would love it to look like some of the preview we were giving around the experience, the fact that you're not just turning up in a suit and tie for 3 days and listening to content, hearing all the latest about the latest product, the latest go-to-market, who's the competition, what's our latest pricing strategy, etc., right? All of that can be done in a much more in a much cleverer way online, self-paced. I think turning the whole experience into a much more immersive delivery will help people learn better. And I think we're getting back to learning techniques, right? Sitting someone in a chair for 8 hours a day and watching PowerPoint, how much are they really retaining? But if they're actually hands-on and part of a game and having to play through that game, and to one of David's questions in the chat, I deliberately refrain from using the word gamification because I hate it personally. I think it's it's one of those passing words that will come and go. But that immersive experience of being hands-on and living through a scenario, a story, and having to apply what you know in terms of that context. And when you bring all the other pieces of the event together that aren't just about the sitting in the lecture theatre or working together, when it is part of the evening event, when it is part of the breakouts, when it is part of the coffee breaks, the way that you interact with your peers, having apps, VR, XR, and bringing those elements into it as well. I would love to see it be that completely immersive type experience.
I think what you're kind of touching on is the fact that the way we educate and do events is somewhat Dickensian. One person speaking to a room of 200 people, I speak, you shut up and listen, that's how it's going to be for the next hour. Have humans ever really learned that way? I don't think so. Did the caveman work like that? Do other mammals work like that? No. We touch, we feel, we want to taste, we want to run around, we want to laugh, we want to interrupt each other and tap each other. And it's a much broader gamut of ways of expressing and learning, right? And I think what you're touching on is that we're going to embrace that much broader, much more creative way of learning and engaging with content and experiences in the future, yeah?
Yeah. And that's the path we've been on, is changing the way that we deliver and the way that we expect people to learn. But what's really happening now with the environment around us is that's really accelerating that. We're in that. I think we're in that zone where invention needs to be accelerated because we're being forced to think in different ways, right?
Okay. So this is going to require a greater level of engagement and creativity and probably intellect to create the kind of experiences you're talking about. Would you agree? And if so, how can we as event producers make that process happen?
That's a big question. It comes down to everything we were talking about. I think it's the content, the way that we, whether we're sat in a room or whether we're sat on a Zoom conference, to me, a lot of the same principles apply in terms of the way that we engage folks, right? We have to capture their imagination, tap into emotional responses, do all of those same things in terms of shaping that experience. And if we can use technologies like VR, AR, XR, whether it be face-to-face or virtual, right? I think we have to tap into that to shape and enhance that experience too, whether it be in person or remote.
Okay, that's cool. All right. Someone else has asked how we can activate knowledge and become more practical in a virtual world. You did touch on that one software platform where people can basically scribble around and stuff, but what else can we do to activate the knowledge so it's not just a passive learning experience?
I can talk from our own experience. We actually measure and test the outcomes. Now, we don't just assume that because you've been through this experience, you can do it. So it doesn't, for what we do, it doesn't finish with the end of the event. It's what is equally important is what you go and do afterwards. So, for example, with the Z launch that we just did, we actually had a badge that you would earn. It was called the Propose to Win badge, which meant you had to go and generate those high quality value propositions for your clients, and you had to do a certain number of them, and you had to deliver them digitally, and then you would work with your manager to vet them and talk them through, and your manager had to sign off that, and these are sales leaders, had to sign off that they were of the right quality. And then we're looking at data. So we're looking at pipeline, we're looking at wins, we're looking at competitive win-loss ratios down at the seller level to say, are they actually taking what we want them to do in terms of those different behaviors and those outcomes, and are they actually walking, that line that we want them to, and measuring that with data. And then we can find patterns. So we're starting to use data science to look at when we put learning out, and depending on who you are and when you take that learning, is what's the impact on your pipeline and your revenue, and then looping it back into the next design phase. So we're really starting to be driven by the data in terms of how we measure that.
Okay, so it sounds like a big part of what you're doing is a level of feedback loop and accountability. Basically, testing, have you actually taken this stuff on board? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay,
Correct.
cool. That's great. Okay, cool. Now, Kyle's asked a question. 3 people have given it this, which means it's, one people want to know about. And this is about how you look after breakouts. A lot of your focus and mine working with you has been about the keynote speech. We want to make the main room amazing, all this engagement. It's awesome. And there is a risk that we can maybe not consider the breakouts or the secondary activities as well. How do we make sure that we don't go all crazy with the main show and neglect the smaller breakout or secondary experiences? How do we get that balance?
It is a good question, and it is a balance. It is about balancing, because quite often, and this is something I've felt the pain of in the past 12 months or so, you'll have executives who feel there should be a certain level of content in a main tent setting, and arguing about the balance of time that you're spending breaking out and actually being applied and hands-on. So getting that balance right is important, but also culturally, and I saw that this links into another question I saw come up as well. We've definitely seen a difference in different geographies in terms of the way that they engage with our breakouts, and we're having to shape the agenda, the nature of the breakout, and the balance of breakout time based on what we learn from different countries and geographies. And I'll call it out because this is, I'm not pointing at any individuals. We've had much more success outside of North America with breakout hands-on applied activation than we have inside North America.
Why is that? Why?
We could go on all day about this one, and it's something I've been talking long and hard about with our sales leadership, to the point where actually for our next face-to-face event, he wants to bring all the North Americans to Madrid and have them mix with the Europeans and see how it can be done. And not just the Europeans, Asia Pacific, Latin America. It's North America, we've had a particular problem for some reason. We think it's related to things like average tenure. There seems to be a more senior, longer tenure population in North America than there is outside. It's not black and white. There's some correlation. It's not the whole correlation. I also think, and probably for any of my North American friends who are watching this from work, they're probably going to follow up with me on this afterwards. But I also think there's a bit of an attitude problem. And I don't mean generally. I'm talking about our own audience, right, specifically here, with our North American teams and those teams outside of North America. It's something we're working on actively. It's something that we will continue to feedback and iterate on and see how we can impact that. I could give some stories and anecdotes about just how bad it's been, but I can tell you that the contrast has been pretty stark between those audiences.
Okay, so it sounds like you're having a lot more regional consideration for the cultural needs of each one, and you're creating not only the content but the delivery to suit each audience. What you were saying there was very, very sensitive towards cultural differences between each region. Is that fair?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Cool. Okay. Right, another one. Terry, you organise a mean club night, wicked DJ, and someone, Carlos, has been asking, do you see there being more virtual club nights and events after COVID-19 or during, and what might they look like?
Absolutely, yes. So there has been an explosion of Facebook live streams with every DJ, every bedroom DJ in the world has been playing sets, right, recently. And then complaining when half of their set gets cut off because of copyright issues on Facebook. I absolutely think there will be. I mean, there was a great example recently where I think it was, and I'm not a big fan of his, but I'll call it out anyway, but it was Marshmello who actually did a virtual gig inside Fortnite. And you had to be there at the time that the gig happened. And he played live inside the Fortnite game, and all of the avatars in Fortnite all turned up and they watched it. And I thought that was genius. That was brilliant. So I could see much more of that happening. How many clubs survive beyond this pandemic? We'll wait to see and be seen. We already know there was a lot of transformation, a lot of big clubs closing, a real shift in the industry. I actually think it is a big opportunity for the music industry to start going more virtual.
Interesting. That's really interesting, actually, that last bit especially. Okay, Terry, thanks so much. Have you got any questions for me or anything else you'd like to add to the content we've already touched on?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, so I just want to say thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much for contributing. And again, everyone here is part of a very big experiment on how this can work. And I hope that we and you, Terry, as well, have learnt from this. And you're going to feed back your lessons from this so we can disseminate it to the entire event leaders community on how we can better do these kind of events.